Okay, it's taping. Ready.
Ready. Okay, well, thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone. First, let me say that a note that this webinar will be recorded. And I'm Patricia Lizarraga, member of the ESG CFA committee. And it's a pleasure for me to present and as well to moderate this webinar together with Mitch Resnick and Hermes Federated, where in these next 40 minutes, we're going to go through one of the most relevant topics in social responsible investment, as it is engagement, where, as you may know, constructive dialogue with insurers is reinforced as an essential tool for the energy transition. As you know, one of the main objectives of the ESG committee is to promote as well and strengthen the ESG certificate, but as well to promote knowledge in this area of sustainability, such as this webinar, as we are convinced of the need of prioritizing sustainability, ethical practices, and social responsibility now as well as in the future. So it's an honor to have Federated Hermes, that is a global leader in active and responsible investment management, and Mitch with us today. Let me please first introduce Mitch, an outstanding professional. He's head of fixed income team and global sustainable fixed income at Federated Hermes Limited, where he has been for 14 years, and where he's also founder and co-president of the Center for Sustainability Investment. Previously, he has worked as well in other entities such as Fortis and Moody's. Mitch is currently working towards a master's degree in sustainability leadership at Cambridge University, and he previously earned a master's degree in international affairs at Columbia University, so a lot of things. Mitch also collaborates with organizations such as the European Leveraged Finance Association. He's co-chair of the Credit Risk and Rating Advisory Committee at the Principles for Responsible Investment, a workstream member of CFO Coalition for the SDGs of the United Nations Global Compact, and in the past, he has also done so on matters related to climate change, IFRS regulations, or green finance matters. After Mitch's presentations, we will have the time for some questions, but you can send them to me during the webinar, and we will try to answer all if possible. Please, Mitch, the floor is yours.
Brilliant. Thank you, Patricia, and thanks everyone for joining. I know it's late in the day, and I'm certainly very grateful that you could dial in. It is a topic I really enjoy talking about. I've got, some 25 years of experience in investment and on the credit side, touching almost all areas of fixed income, but I've become enamored of and fascinated and enamored of and believe profoundly in sustainable finance. For me, it's, investing enough is complex, and assessing sustainability and understanding sustainability is so complex. You've got complexity on complexity. So for me, sustainable finance is really interesting. So today's topic, as it says on the screen, is the integration of engagement into credit investing. And so run through a series of slides in the beginning a little more quickly than the ones in the end. But I want to first discuss our own perception of why sustainability matters at all from an investment point of view, the engagement philosophy behind, the philosophy behind engagement, and the principles behind engagement on behalf of creditors. And then from there, how we actually implement engagement in the investment decision. So we'll drill down into some of the details, and if there's time, I'll have a chance to run through a bit of case study. So just very briefly, Federated Hermes is a global asset manager based in the U.S. Federated acquired Hermes about 6 or 7 years ago. I'm from the Hermes side. One of the reasons they acquired us was for our stewardship and ESG legacy and ethos. For example, our stewardship business, the engagement business goes back 20 years, and was able to port that engagement capacity and experience specifically into strategies. We do have an engagement fund, and you hear reference to that. Globally, we're about 800 billion in AUM, with about 100 or so in fixed income. So let's kick off. This is a slide that I like to use when talking to a crowd. It's a little more difficult to do in a conversation like this, but I just wondered if anyone recognizes this. It's okay. I'll hit the next button, which is these are called climate stripes, and each of these stripes represents in a single year the average temperature of the planet from 1850 until a few years ago. So as you can see, I mean, for me, this is a beautiful illustration of what's been happening to to the planet. You know, obviously we've been heating up almost in an unbridled way. And I mentioned this and the following slide to set up the discussion. So on the left here, we're looking at a concept called planetary boundaries. There are 9 planetary boundaries that that if we operate within the 9 planetary boundaries, the planet is stable. It's predictable. We can generate economic value off of that. The problem is that the planet has now moved past 6 of the planetary boundaries, and we're effectively moving into an area, you've heard reference to tipping points, where we're not sure how the planet is going to react in the years going forward. On the right side of the chart is reflects the degradation or the possible degradation of the biodiversity of the planet. Now, this is important and linked inexorably to the other slides because over half of global GDP, or the equivalent of around 60 trillion per year, is moderately or substantially dependent on nature. So I mention all of this because we know from the IPCC and others that systemic risk is rising, and we need systematic changes to mitigate that. And this is why, these changes are impairing the ability of the planet to create value for what will soon be 10 billion people. So we know that lots of global organizations are rising to the challenge to mitigate these risks. We've seen the Conference of Parties, global polities like the European Union are far ahead. But I want to step through just 2 more slides to tee up why engagement matters, which is that given the previous slides that shows the degeneration of the planet leading to systemic risks, global organizations are responding to that. So this is a mapping of regulatory change across the globe. You can see the center line there about corporate ESG disclosures. This green being these are regulations in effect, with red meaning nothing significant. The point of this slide is to show there's one area of regulation that most countries can seem to agree with, and that's ESG disclosures. Other areas are in progress, but the point is that this and future regulation is beginning to change the way companies act and report, and is creating some element of structural change. And combine that, if that's a push, there's also a pull element. Organizations, sort of companies, are beginning to realize that they can actually tap into this change, and it's an opportunity. They can actually create value and make money from that. So this is a mapping of incentive programs, more on the government side, less on the regulation side, to drive money toward innovation and technologies that are leaning into this structural change. So on a 5-year basis, investment in renewables and transition technologies was about 12%. But if you curtail that to just 3 years, it means that that there's an acceleration of the investment going into renewables and transition technologies, because governments and companies are seeing that there is a structural change happening. So now we're begin to get to the heart of it. So evolving regulation, shifting value chains, changing consumer preferences, investment in technologies are the forces driving this transition from where we were before, although I said today, so we'll call it today, and where we're headed for tomorrow. And that's the premise for me that sets the stage nicely for why ESG analysis and consideration is imperative, right? So if these non-fundamental factors, environmental and social factors, have an effect on the cash flows of a business, then they have effect on the enterprise value of the business, and that means they touch credit risk. So on that basis, understanding ESG, and I know I'm preaching to the choir, is an imperative. Now, we've done some quantitative analysis on this. The chart on the left shows on the x-axis in declining in descending order, we have a quantitative assessment of ESG, creatively called QSG. And that goes from very, very strong to very, very weak ESG. On the left is the implied CDS spread based on that QESG score. And we show that there is statistical significance between the ESG strength of a business and its credit spreads. Now, this is just a theoretical model, but it shows that there is a relationship between ESG and credit spread, and therefore valuations. Now, this controls for credit ratings. So we saw great dispersion in credit ratings per ESG category. So there is a link between ESG quality and credit spreads. So, all of this tees it up for the financial and investment basis for engagement. And now we're going to get into a couple of slides to talk about, as a creditor in particular, the ability, the rationale, the basis, and the ability to engage. Financial stakeholder justifies engagement. The trajectory of a company is important to a financial stakeholder because it affects the valuations. Therefore, it gives me kind of the right to engage with the company. By engagement, we mean constructive dialogue that with the company to encourage improving sustainability profiles, and that reduces. We think that conversation itself, just having dialogue with the company, reduces the operating uncertainty of a company. So we think that engagement actually is important for Planet, but also for investment performance, and that's the basic, investment philosophy behind that. The key thing is that engagement is not an offset. It's not, if it were, you could say like, oh, we own the coal companies, but we engage with them, so it's just fine. No, you're engaging to create change, which we believe delivers supports performance as the company. If the company leans into the structural change that I discussed, but the basis for that, of course, is the investment itself. That creates the foundation, and that gives the right of investors to engage. Now, here is a chart that shows the market capitalization of equity versus fixed income. The equity market is the dark blue line underneath the lighter blue line, which is fixed income outstandings through what was it since 2009. So you can see that market cap of fixed income is greater than market cap of equity. And here, this is a really important principle about the ability of a creditor to engage, because we get this question a lot. You're not a shareholder. You can't be on the board. You can't force the company to change, through the shareholding. But that may be true. But the leverage point of creditors derives for something else, and that is we have cash. And cash is the oxygen of a company. A company needs cash for OpEx, CapEx, and so that gives us, first I described the right that we have, but also the ability is this dependency on the capital markets. Now, this is particularly effective for companies that have a recurring presence in the capital markets. I mean, you can think of a company that's refinancing in the market all the time. There's a contact point there, and some would argue leverage every time there's a new bond issue. I have mixed feelings about that, but the point is there's a touch point, and you develop relationships over establishing long-term goals and engagement. So that recurring presence confers the dependency on the capital market, so it gives us a bit more of a voice. This is particularly true for companies that again have that recurring presence in the market. So I also want to add one note about, talked about equity between equity and credit. This is a paper we wrote several years ago called We Can All Get Along. We wrote a part 2. I don't think that there is a material conflict or even immaterial conflict of interest between equity and credit when it comes to engagement. Because as I said in the beginning, these factors affect cash flows and therefore enterprise value. Now, enterprise value is important for shareholders as much as it is for creditors. The response of those particular securities, of course, will vary, but I don't see any conflict of interest there. So actually, quite often when we engage, we do so in a kind of capital structure agnostic way. For private companies and high yield and others, yes, there's no public equity, so we engage just on behalf of the debt side of the balance sheet, the debt side of the balance sheet. But also, if there is public equity, we'll engage that as well. And that's really important also when you're trying to influence change, because if you combine your equity holdings with your bond holdings, your voice is much louder, and that's really important. I will say one other thing about engagement. Engagement, like I said before, it's just not an offset. It's like we own the coal company, we send the letter, job done. I mean, we're going to talk about engagement, but as engagers, and talk about the team, there's a responsibility there to really understand the company. It doesn't bode us well if we are myopic, tree-hugging activists. It's know the cash flows of the business, take a holistic approach, be consistent in your objectives, ambitious but realistic with the objectives. And I'm going to come back to that, because there is engagement is not one single panacea. There, like anything, there are different, shall we say, levels of it, and I think we're obviously at the higher end. We will, engagement is necessarily a forward-looking practice. And we will convert our engagement views into assessments. On the left side, you see these a set of scores. When we're supporting our investments that have sustainability objectives, we generate scores to assess, their outcomes of an assessment of a sustainability analysis of a company. We have a proprietary approach. Importantly, it's independent from the independent from the financial assessment. So it's purely just on the sustainability basis. There's no outside influence on that. And of course, it's forward looking. It necessarily must be. It's not so much about where a company is today, it's about where it's headed. And it's about looking for accountability. And that requires people, which is why we have embedded within the fixed income team 7 people stretched across the globe. And I guess I'm kind of a half person in this, so 7.5. I've set up the team, but now I'm expanded a little bit on responsibilities. The point is, these are 7 dedicated sustainability experts. They have passion, they have background, they are skilled, and they are working hand in hand. So we effectively have 2 analysts on every name. The financial analyst and the sustainability analyst, who do substantial overlap. This is dedicated to the fixed income team embedded. While it is a dedicated team that provides that end of view, engagement is a real skill set, and so that's why we've got this established this team. Now, I talked, and you can see lower right, we across our business, we also have a broader engagement team across everything we do, the global footprint. We're engaging under around 2.1 trillion. We've been doing this for 20 years, and we've taken that intellectual capital and curtailed it specifically to reach investment outcomes. And this is where I want to get into you've heard why engagement matters from a financial point of view. You've seen what the foundation is for that from an investment philosophy point of view. Now we're going to, and you can see that we've got a team dedicated to converting the engagement views into scores and assessment that affect the investment view. Now let's talk a little bit about what is the method for engagement. So we will often use the SDGs as a really great framework for the outcomes that we're looking for. But when we begin the engagement, the analysts will do a sustainability profile of the business and identify the things that are relevant and material, and and this will vary on the maturity, having this discussion and getting to the second stage of getting the company to recognize that they should be working on this, and have they started this, and what do they think about it? This is a really important step, because you have to scale your ambition for where the company is, and that will be a lot different from, say, a large cap company, like a Telefonica, for example, which is extremely advanced and a leader in this space. Our engagement with them is on a whole different level. Whereas you can imagine a much smaller high yield company where they're like, we're trying to improve, we don't really know where to begin. And it might even be with like, first of all, you need to look through your value chain. You just need to disclose and get the state of play today. So how we set, how we get companies to understand where they are will vary. It's different even in emerging markets versus Western capital markets. So it's not, we won't go in with one sort of inflexible view of where companies are. But so we'll raise the issue, we get the acknowledgement, and then we begin to get targets set, come up with a credible plan. And this is where the art is in the engagement side, because you want to be ambitious but realistic at the same time, and that that can only be done through the dialogue and through in person. You just can send a letter and just get back and say like, yeah, we plan to do that, and it's not a lobbying effort, it's a real collaboration, and that's why we have people. It's a lot of human capital in this, and getting through these stages of raising raising an objective, map to the SDGs, getting the company to recognize it, setting targets, and delivering on that actually can take years. And in our high yield fund, we've seen sort of 2 to 3 years before we hit some of these targets. And then once we hit those targets, actually we go back and we set some new ones. So it might be like, set decarbonization targets. Okay, now make them aligned to the SBT, make them SBTI aligned, things like that. Now, in the investment process in supporting the investment funds, we've mapped these all to SDGs. We actually convert these to something we called an SDG score, and you can see a repetition of this wording here: proprietary, independent, ex ante. There's a lot that goes into it. But based on the engagement, we determine the likelihood that a company can convert, the potential for change to realized change. And this is where engagement for some of our clients and pension schemes differs, because this is how we convert the engagement to actual investment outcomes. Because where a company lands on this scoring determines whether we're going to hold it for how much, et cetera. And you can see that there are multiple inputs into this SDG, Sustainable Development Gold score, that our sustainability analysts look like. But 1, 2, 3, 4 down is something called engagement insight. These aren't equally weighted, I would say. This engagement insight is incredibly important because, again, we're forward looking. Again, this is a kind of constructive dialogue. And I realize I'm looking at the clock. I'm probably running a little bit behind here, but so I'll begin to sort of wind down here. But this is literally how we convert the engagement into a score, in terms of failure, improving. We look for accountability, and then sort of in the leaders, and that will determine whether some names can go into funds at all, and how much we would own. By way of example, I've just from terms of case studies, this is a mapping of the SDG objectives that we're looking for in our SDG engagement high yield fund. Now, if you can see, the fund is say 130 a name, 135 a name, we're well above that here. And that is because we will have potentially more than one, at least one, quite often 2 to 3 targets from an engagement point of view mapped to SDGs that we look for. The SDGs are inexorably linked. We think of them in silos, but they're inexorably linked, and where there are connections, we want to be aware of that and understand how one change in one operating activity or product can affect another SDG. The top 2 are climate related. This is not unexpected, particularly from a fund that's basically focused on transition. So decarbonization and products that deliver into decarbonization are universal, but we do like those sectors that are material emitters, the ones that are leaning into this and making the transition. Circular economy is also another big one there, with SDG 12, value chains, et cetera. Now, this is interesting because I think I just want to talk briefly about where we end up in the future is I think we'll see more and more on water. Water isn't terribly big here, with 10 in the fund have objectives, but I think water has increasingly become a big issue. I think it's increasingly being carved out of biodiversity as a standalone issue. I think it is potentially linked to migration and political risk. We can have another conversation on that, but biodiversity and water, I think, will be be further issues. The final slide, and I think, Patricia, am I running out? Are we time for, we're getting close to Q&A, or we okay on time? Yep, she's giving me a thumbs up. We'll do one last slide and just spend a minute here. This is a pulp producer based in Brazil. You can see on the right-hand side some of the objectives here. So this company had 4 effective SDGs that we were linking to the engagement, and you can see related to climate and biodiversity, social factors. And we would build for a company like this an investment thesis as well as sustainability thesis. And you can see there in the light blue, we're engaging on going beyond net zero, but also tracking to them and making sure they deliver that. The biodiversity is linked to deforestation, and also the final one is related to indigenous communities in this area. This has been a great success story for us. They've had no trouble raising capital in the Western capital markets. They've got sustainability linked bonds, and it's performed extremely well for us. And I think it stops at a certain year that's before now, but we have. But in any case, it's been a great performer to us. So at least on an anecdotal basis, you can see that there's a link to that, and generally believe that companies that embrace engagement are better governed companies, and those tend to be the companies that avoid that. The second order effect of all this is that the better governed companies tend not to be the ones that are your tail risk of rents. If you look in which companies tend to blow up, they tend to be the poorly governed companies. So there's a screening effect to engagement as well. If you're disciplined in how you do that, from an investment point of view, and it's almost screening out the poorly governed companies. So that's those are the conclusion of my slides. I didn't really look on the clock. I think we're doing okay, Patricia, and I will remove the slides if I can get my stop sharing, I think.
Perfect.
There we go. Let me just stop that, and then
There you are.
great. There we are. So first of all, thank you. I hope that was interesting.
Thank you so much to you, Mitch, for this interesting presentation. I would like to ask you, well, to focus on 2 of the main ideas that you have raised during the presentation. So
Okay.
firstly, is that aspects related to sustainability, and you were mentioning that in the whole presentation, impacts on the forecast of future cash flows, both in value and as well in risk, and therefore must necessarily be integrated into the evaluation of the investment decisions. No? Secondly, one of the sentences you highlighted was saying that on both factors, I think I picked it well, we invest where a company is going rather than where it has been. And this idea is what justifies the need to carry out this engagement with the company in order to influence and as well assess, of course, with the knowledge of the facts that you have those experts in the analysis that you were mentioning, the strength and success of the priorities, no? Plans and actions that the company is putting in place and will implement to achieve these objectives. The first question we would like to ask you is related to this last idea, and is at what point does the ineffectiveness of interactions have to lead to this investment, and what to do when engagement fails? And looking at 2 aspects. Firstly, if the company stops being transparent and thus not provide the necessary information to be able to carry out the evaluation and monitoring. And secondly, if they do not achieve the adequate delivery of its plans, not making enough progress in the objectives it has set in terms of sustainability.
Yeah, I mean, this is a great question because it speaks to the differences between our engagement service that we provide pension schemes and others to engage on behalf of them, and then engagement for investment. If you have a sustainability overlay in an investment strategy, implies that the sustainability has to have an influence on the investment decisions. Otherwise, what's the point? So necessarily, you're going to have a slightly smaller investable universe because of the sustainability threshold. But when engagement fails, we kind of have a couple is beginning to fail. We have a couple of choices, and we've definitely have probably 3 to 4 years, 3 or 4 year per year that would fail in the program. We invest. We look at the profile of the company, say, okay, look, they've got a sustainability report. They've got their numbers that are publicly accessible. This looks like, this could be an engagement candidate. But if it begins to fail, then we actually, if you recall, there was an SDG score of 1 to 5, and if it begins to fail, then the score gets downgraded, and at a certain point, we would begin to reduce the position, but we want to maintain that financial stakeholding. But at some point, if it's failing for the thematic funds, then we would we would disinvest. We would sell the name and try to find another name. Now, we do have some strategies that are not predicated on sustainable outcomes, and there that information would be used for what we call an ESG score, which is like, okay, well, if they're failing that, what does it say about their governance? What does it say about, how aware they are of the transition risks in the business, and they're not doing anything about it. They seem vulnerable. Are we being paid for that risk? There's another option, which is an escalation. If we're trying to reach a company and they say, call us on Tuesday, call us on Tuesday, call us on Tuesday, call us on Tuesday, and we get no response. What we have done in the past, we've actually gone to their bankers, the bankers that have arranged the bond deals, said, hey, look, we've been trying to get in touch with, these guys. Can you help us out? And that's actually worked, where the bank said, yes, we will do that. We'll try to arrange a meeting. And it actually worked. Now, that doesn't work all the time, but that is one path for escalation if engagement is failing.
Okay, good. Then a second question is, how closely do credit analysts and as well sustainability analysts work together when you were mentioning them?
Yeah, so good question, because I refer to it a little bit because I'm trying to emphasize as much as possible that, with this dedicated team, this is not, on a different floor or in a library. This is a lot of collaboration, because the engagement is a touch point with a company. And there's a lot of rich information that a credit analyst would want to hear through that discussion. So quite often in engagement, the credit analyst and the sustainability analyst will speak together with the company to ask their questions and work together. They'll have discussions before they go in. They work together, they'll have some discussions on the scores. Ultimately, the sustainability analyst, of course, has the final say in that score. That preserves the independence. But there's so our sustainability analysts will present at credit committee, just like the credit analysts present, but the use of the information is slightly different. So the credit analyst will use that information to create what we call, again, creatively, an ESG score. That's slightly different than our sustainability scores. The ESG scores is saying, okay, based on this information, to what extent does this affect the credit risk of the company? Back to that cash flows, enterprise value, credit risk, why it matters from an investment point of view. And so the engagement information, the discussion with our sustainability analyst will be converted for the credit analyst into a risk assessment, basically. And then the sustainability analyst will say, okay, to what extent is this company contributing to the SDGs? Slightly different exam questions to answer.
Mm-hmm. Okay, then another point that I wanted to raise as well, and regarding how this can impact into the results of the company, no? Do you have empirical evidence during the time that you have been with integrated engagement activities of the contributions that this practice has made to the result of your management?
Yeah, so doesn't surprise me that someone asked that question, because it is something that we get often, and it's a tough one, because the way we do attribution, I think attribution is a flawed process anyway. Contribution analysis and attribution analysis, you look at sector effect, spread effect, effective rates, etc. And all is the spread effect. Doesn't say the spread effect, sort of like, it's like, well, you're the performance of this fund, most of the performance is driven by you got your call right on the spread effect of total performance. But you don't know what the source of that credit risk is. Was it ESG? Was it operating risk, financial risk, ESG risk? You don't know. But I do think that there are, at the center of this question, there are little, indications around it that show, okay, well, we did a quantitative analysis, shows that ESG is linked to credit spreads. Okay, well, we're engaging based on ESG factors, so if they're improving their ESGs, their social environmental activity, then their ESG scores are improving, and we see that there's a positive link between spread improvement and ESG. Okay, that's good enough for me. Oh, by the way, well-governed companies tend not to be the names that blow up. So if we're engaging actively with someone, we feel like the governance on that is pretty good. If they're blowing us off, then there may be other reasons for it, but you don't know. But you're not engaging with the best governed companies, so you avoid blowups. And that we've seen that for sure in several names over the years. So I think there have been some academic studies that have looked into this. and some have shown some sort of no worse than neutral outcomes, and some have shown positive outcomes.
Okay.
But they're always based on these kind of SDG scores and have problems with those because they're a little bit more backward looking. So I don't know, but I will say the value is the relationship with the company. And that forward looking aspect is really, really important. There's so much rich information in that relationship.
That's true. That's true. Okay, well, taking on the time, we'll go for just the last question.
Okay.
And maybe as a final question to leave with some anecdotes, any particular good or bad engagement stories that you could share with us?
Oh gosh. Yeah, I mean, it's so funny because the analysts, like, it's really cool with the analysts after if they engage with the company after several years and they come back and it's like, they just like come back and they like pump their arms like, yes, they just set the target, or yes, they just passed it. It's like, it's great. And there was a Brazilian steel company that, where they, it's like, we're not interested at all. They had they had no targets. And then they came back and they said, you know what? We think this stuff is actually important to the capital markets, and they established some targets, and that was a big win. And then their next path is to align those with Science-Based Target Initiative, SBTI. So that's a victory. There's some of the poor ones, I think. There, some of them are. I think one of our analysts was in the U.S. In Texas and meeting with some energy companies. And for like a year and a half, they got this sort of manana, yeah, we definitely want to talk to you. He shows up to the meeting, and like all these people were supposed to show up, and like no one shows up. And he's like, and he was furious, and he was emotional. He was like, this is dumb. SDG 5, we're getting out of this name. I can't believe it. They told you, it was just, he didn't even show up. It was just like, there was like IR shows up and says, yeah, we're not going to talk about it. So what did you bother with this meeting? But it was a quick way for a downgrade and a quick way for a divestment from our point of view.
Very, very good. Well,
Yeah.
thank you very much, Mitch and
Pleasure.
Hermes Federated, for this interesting topic and all the questions that you have answered, and for sharing all your knowledge with us. We have to leave it here. We want to be sure we made them on time. And thanks again. And we look forward to see you again on another webinar. So thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me, and enjoyed the conversation with you. Talk soon. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you all for attending.
Thank you, everyone, for attending.